Tooting Tarantulas and Talking Tacos on this final day of the San Antonio Book Festival. We're so glad that you could join us today. I am your moderator, Karla Martinez, and I will be with you for the next hour, along with two great authors that we are going to meet in a bit. So as we go through it, if you have any questions, please feel free to put in the Q&A chat, and we're hoping to get to those questions the last few minutes of the session. So, welcoming David Bowles. He is the award-winning Mexican-American author of They Call Me Güero and other titles for young readers. He is proud to share his book, 13th Street, #1, Battle the Bad Breath Fats, with the San Antonio Book Festival community. Because of his family roots in Mexico, he's traveled all over that country, studying creepy legends, exploring ancient ruins, and avoiding monsters so far. And he lives in Donna, Texas. Thank you. Welcome, David. We also have Stephen Shaskan. Stephen has written and illustrated a dozen children's books. His debut picture book, A Dog is a Dog, was a New York Public Library 100 titles for reading and sharing selection and was a CCBC Choices book. He holds a BFA in illustration from Rhode Island School of Design and worked with kids for 20 years as an early childhood educator and an after-school and summer art teacher. He performs musical story times, presents at schools, conferences, and festivals, and teaches comic classes to kids. His latest book is titled Pizza and Taco, Best Party Ever. Stephen lives with and often collaborates with his wife, Trisha Speed Shaskan, in Minneapolis. So welcome, Stephen. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we're going to go ahead and start off. If I could have each of you, David, we'll start with you. If you could talk to us about your 13th Street series.
Absolutely. So here are some of the books. Woohoo! It's a 6-book series about 3 cousins who live in South Texas, who find themselves transported one day by taking a shortcut when they're visiting their aunt in the big city, Gulf City, to this alternate world called 13th Street, which is essentially one long, unending street with no crossroads, no way to get off of it, that's populated by monsters. So they have to figure out in each book how to defeat the particular monsters of that book, so that a portal will open up and they can come back to their hometown of Moderator. And so it's a great, humorous, fun adventure series. It also has lots of really cool life lessons and shows the Mexican American community in South Texas in a really engaging and fun way.
Awesome, thank you. And we're going to talk to you a bit more about your books in a little bit, so thank you. And Stephen, would you like to talk to us about your books?
Yeah, sure. Pizza and Taco, this is a graphic novel, early graphic novel series for young readers. And it's Pizza and Taco are best friends, and the first book kind of covers where they get into a little bit of a friend fight over who's the best. But they end up making up by the end. And then we've got Pizza and Taco, Best Party Ever, which just came out, and this is about Pizza and Taco decide to throw a party. They're despite being a piece of pizza and a taco, they're very human characters. They have a lot of fails, and they're friends, but like all good friends, they don't always mesh together the best, and they don't always succeed in what they're doing. And so I really like that about these characters. And this one is Pizza and Taco, super awesome comic, and this doesn't come out till August, but I'm really excited about that one because in this one they make a comic of their own, and so I think that's something I love to do as a kid. So yeah, I'm really excited about that one. And there's actually their comic is actually in the book, so yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you. And I would like to remind all of our attendees and our audience members that we hope you'll consider purchasing books from David and Stephen from the Nora Bookshop. The book festival's bookseller, independent bookstores have had a hard time during the pandemic, so we hope you'll support them and these writers and the festival by purchasing their excellent books. So just click on the Buy the Book button on the festival site, and you'll be able to access the books and purchase them from Newer Bookshop. So thank you so much. So once again, as questions come to you, if you'd like to go ahead and just put them in that Q&A box, and we'll hopefully get to them at the end. So we're just going to start off with some questions. So Dave, I'll start with you again. Why did you decide to write for younger readers?
That's a great question. You know, I'm 51, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I was a big reader. My mom taught me to read before I went to school, and so I spent a lot of time reading during those early years, and advanced really quickly in reading level. Libraries became super important to me, and it's the thing that set me, I think, on the path to being the first person in my family to go to college. But it was kind of like a blessing and a curse, because on the one hand, I was being exposed to all this great literature and learning to read and expanding my vocabulary and my horizons. But in the 70s and 80s, it was really, really hard for you to find any books when you were a kid that had Mexican Americans in them, or that had Latinx people in general in them. So most of the stuff I was reading centered other people's lives, mainly white kids, but also kids from other cultures. And so that meant that there's like kind of like this unconscious thing you come away with, which is, oh, if I want to be a writer, I'm gonna have to write that story. I can't really write the story of my own family, or, my own cousins, my own hometown of McAllen in deep South Texas. It just doesn't occur to you that that's possible. And it wasn't until I got to college that I began to read books that were written by Mexican Americans and realized that that could happen. And so I became a teacher. And one of the things I wanted to do as a teacher was to find books for my kids that would, for my students, that would serve that would fill that gap that I had in my own childhood, and like help to keep them from going through what I went through, which is this feeling of having been robbed, and as I was doing it, and it was hard, this is the mid 90s when I was a teacher, it was hard. Nowadays there are a lot more books, we've gotten into a much better place, but then it was hard, and it was one of the things that made me begin to write stories for my students. I would retell like folk tales that we all knew, stories that we had all kind of grown up with, being from the same community here on the border, and using all of the mechanisms of literary short story writing to create stories for them. And they responded so well to it, and I taught them how to do it themselves, that I realized that that's what I wanted to do, was to write for young people. And it set me on a path. And we were chatting about before the session started how, I started writing for like teenagers, like YA, and then I have like started going back in age to like to middle grade and then lower middle grade, and then this chapter book series, which is for kids ages 5 to 9, and now my first children's book is coming out in the summer. And it's a delight. It's a delight to write for those younger kids and give them, fascinating worlds in which they can see themselves reflected, and that can also serve as like, portals for kids from other cultures into the Mexican American community, so they can see like how awesome our community is and how cool our food is. Tacos.
So you mentioned the idea about, wanting to see, yourself and having students and children in your community being able to see themselves within the books. Was there like certain books that you saw that you loved when you were younger that you kind of hoped that reflected you a bit more, or something that you read that made you want to write yourself?
Yeah, no, I mean, there were plenty of books that I read that made me want to be a writer. By the time I was in 6th grade, I was already reading like adult books, but because that's how advanced. Like, I mean, like the more you read, the more your ability to read grows, and I went pretty quickly into adult books. But in those early years, I was really into like science fiction and fantasy, and so things like the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, or the Earthseed books by Ursula K. Le Guin, or a lot of the books of Madeleine L'Engle, like her Time Quartet. There was the third book in that quartet, which is the one that begins A Wrinkle in Time, that was made into a movie recently. Really cool series. The third book in that, A Swiftly Tilting Planet, even though when I read it nowadays, it's like really fraught and problematic. It had the main character, Charles Wallace, traveling back in time and engaging with indigenous people at the time of the European invasion of the Americas. And so it was a book that engaged in things that were meaningful to me in terms of like identity, even though they weren't like about Mexican Americans and our indigenous heritage or whatever. So there were, and I was definitely inspired by reading those books to want to do something that could take like the storytelling, because I come from a family of storytellers. Like my grandmother Garza held us spellbound when I was a kid. I mean, she was the reason I started reading, because she would tell us great stories. Most of my cousins were boys, and so we had like one female cousin, Christy Perez, who never wanted to be like hanging out with us for some reason. I don't know why you want to hang out with 24 boys ages like 4 to 13. Why not? But we would during the summers get dropped off at my grandmother Garza's trailer in South McAllen, and the way she would deal with all these rambunctious boys, because it would be like 10 or 12 of us at a time there, was to call us in after we played around in her yard and scared her chickens and so forth, and sit us down and tell us stories, and like really scary stories about La Llorona, Las Lechuzas, La Mano Patona, which is the scary like claw that goes around. And I love those stories, and I wanted to know more stories and have questions about the stories answered. And she was the one who told me, look, if you want answers, if you want more stories, you have to learn to read, because all that stuff is in book. I'm tired. Ya me cansé. Yo no tengo más cuentos que contar. I have no more stories to tell you. So inadvertently, she inspired me to want to be a storyteller, and I wanted to take that kind of storytelling texture and mood and so forth, but like use it, tell stories in writing. I had to come to fall in love with certain writers and the way they did things. I was, really into like also like science fiction books that Robert Heinlein wrote and so forth, Andre Norton and people like that. And so those two things kind of like eventually came together. Also, my love of comic books, because I'm really into comic books, and also historietas, that we would go to Remesa and we would buy whatever cool adventure series was out in the historietas in Mexico at the time. And so all those things kind of like merged together over time and made me want to write something that would like I don't know, layer all those things in interesting ways and make it accessible to like modern readers, especially kids, but that would still kind of resonate with all of that, if you understand what I mean.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Stephen, same question to you. Why did you want to write for younger readers?
Well, I come from a background of after I graduated from art school, I ended up working with kids, and I worked in elementary schools, and my wife Trisha Shaskan, she was working there at the school, and that's where we met, and she taught after school writing and reading and storytelling to kids, and I taught after school art to kids, and so we both use picture books in our stories and in our classrooms. So we always had stuff to talk about with picture books. And from there, I kept looking at them and kept working on them. And then I became a preschool teacher for a while, and I was always reading picture books. And I decided to start developing art for picture books and portfolios to send out. And so that was something that was like really important to me. But then I started thinking about how I wanted to present my work, and one of the things they say is to show a story, and a lot of people use things like like the Three Little Bears or something, or like a fairy tale to show their stories. But I decided to start writing my own stories, and that's how I kind of started doing it. So from there, I bring the kids that I work with always into my work, and so that's always important too. And so that's always been something that I always, you know, like the ones who are a little bit more naughty, a lot of times I bring into I bring into my stories, you know, to show, you know, to give them a little place in books too, and a little, you know, the kids who want to be loud, the kids who want to be a little bit off. So yeah, so that's, you know, that's something that I always love. I love humor, and I love nonsense as well, and so yeah. So that's yeah, I definitely, that's why I write for kids. I, you know, worked with them for so long, and then yeah, and I will say, growing up myself, I love comic books as well, and that's what I mostly read. I was a reluctant reader, actually, so I didn't read a lot, and I wasn't a strong reader, but I read thousands of comics. So somehow somehow I wasn't a reluctant reader. It was just what I chose to read at the time. I was reluctant about reading certain things, but not reluctant about reading, you know, like all the different comic books that I read. And so that really informed my you know, art and my love of comics. And that's why I love making Pizza and Taco, because it's like I get to make my own comics, and it's just a lot of fun to do that. And yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So David, you were talking about the cousins in your books, and you mentioned your cousins as well. So were your cousins and like your family growing up, were they the inspiration for the Primos and the 13th Street series?
Yeah, definitely. Can you hear me all right? Because I put this headset on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Woo-hoo. Yes, totally. My cousins and our relationship had a lot to do with the cousins in this book. I come from a family that's like, I mean, we're Mexican American, but like we're like kind of racially diverse. So, for example, my brother Fernando is he's you would say Afro Latino. He's Afro Mexicano. We have different like moms, and there are people in our family who are more indigenous and people who are lighter skinned. You know how it is. Like you get together any group of cousins in the Mexican American community, and there's going to be the güero, there's going to be the moreno, and there's going to be like the aperlado. It's just the way it is. And I wanted to showcase that diversity that exists in my own family by having the cousins be the children of sisters, but that to have all of them have fathers from different cultures. So like Ivan's dad is Jewish American, and Malia's dad is Dominican. And I just wanted to make sure that, and then Dante, his dad is Mexican American, so he's like pure Mexican American, whatever that means, right? And that's kind of the way it is in my family as well, where like my cousins come from like distinct genetic backgrounds than I do, but also the interactions and the personalities of the characters. I wanted them to reflect the kind of, because what would happen is, and I don't know if you guys have had this experience if you have lots of cousins, but like you cluster together like by age or by gender or whatever, and so you'll have a whole group of like a dozen cousins, and they'll break into like maybe 4 triads or 3 quartets or whatever, and you kind of have like your little clique within the group of cousins, and that's what I wanted to depict here, and to show that like Malia is not like really all that excited about hanging out with her 2 boy cousins, but to show how over time, especially because they're having to fight monsters, that tends to be a bonding experience. You know, to show them like growing closer together over time and seeing each other as friends and not just cousins. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, most of my time was either in school with friends out of school or at home with my cousin. So your cousins become like your very first friends. I wanted to reflect that here as well. And so definitely that had a lot of influence, but also the relationship among my own nephews and nieces and my children. So thinking about the way my 2 brothers' children and my children interact, and how my kids interact with their cousins in Mexico. From my wife's most of her brothers and sisters still live in Mexico. A couple of them live here, and so all of that rich interaction of personalities informs what I decided to do with these three.
Yeah, I'm one of like 20 something cousins, so I completely, get that, having all the different, the different ones and different groups that take place. So out of the ones in your books, who are you, or who are you most like, or?
I think I'm more like Ivan, because Ivan is, he's like there's like, you can use the three B's. Malia's the boss, Dante is the beauty, and Ivan is the brains. And so I was always like the little raton de biblioteca. I was always like the smart kid, who was also kind of like, because I had my nose in the book all the time, I missed out on some of the more enjoyable things people were doing, and my cousins would have to come and like take the book out of my hands and drag me with them on whatever adventures. And so I'm a bit more like Ivan, although Ivan has a really great character arc that by the end he accepts that he needs that as well. He needs the things that his cousins provide him in his life, and that kind of excitement and having faith in them instead of just having to have everything proven by a book. If science doesn't say it, which is the kind of kid I was. It's very annoying. So yeah, I identify most with them. I wish I could identify with like Malia or with Dante. I wish I were as guapito as Dante, or as like take charge as Malia. But yeah, I'm definitely the bookworm.
Well, they definitely complement each other, so they do. Stephen, so what led to the characters of Pizza and Taco? How did it start?
Well, I do a lot of school visits, and when I do school visits, we often create characters with kids. And when we've asked students, like, what does this character like to eat? It's always pizza or tacos. So I kind of thought that was a lot of fun, and I thought, well, that'd be fun to make two different characters, a pizza and a taco. And my favorite food is pizza, and my wife's favorite food is tacos. So I kind of like put a little bit of both of our characters into those characters. And taco's a little bit more excitable. And pizza is a little bit more of a pessimist. So I kind of put that in there, and then I also thought back to like when I was a kid, and my best friend down the street, Matt, we used to play all the time, but almost every day that we played, we'd end in some kind of argument, and you're not my friend anymore type thing. And so like but then the next day we'd be playing again. So like I kind of brought that kind of like the reality of childhood, like of big emotions and failing and not really also like imagining the world in such a bigger way than it actually really is, like to bring into like when you think like when a kid puts on a play, what the kid thinks the play looks like versus what it really looks like, and that type of thing. And so like that type of thing I tried to bring into my books a lot. So just kind of thinking about how kids think about the grand picture of things versus what the reality looks like. So, yeah.
Well, I was going to actually ask you which one, pizza or tacos, but you answered that. David, you want to get on
it's
controversial topics? Which one would you choose?
Hey, look, I'm from the Rio Grande Valley, so of course tacos, but like tacos,
Okay.
you know what I'm talking about. When I say South Texas tacos, it's just different than the character taco in his books, but nonetheless.
Yes.
In a distant sequel, he can have Taco's cousin from Mexico, which is the soft taco.
Yeah. Yes.
I always argue that we should be calling what people just normally call tacos, we should be calling them hard tacos instead of calling like actual tacos soft. But anyway, Karla's from South Texas, and so she knows about the huge taco debate, which is, does the Valley, San Antonio, or Austin have the best tacos? And like to me, like San Antonio and Austin being included in that question to begin with is just like we're already starting wrong. So apologies to all you San Antonio people. But anyway, we won't start a war in the middle of this panel about who has the best tacos.
That's another panel. So, Stephen, you introduced several new characters in Best Party Ever. Are we going to see more characters coming in like future books?
Yeah, I actually I have now I just finished book 4. I finished the art for that, and that's called Too Cool for School. And so they actually go to a school in this one and in that one, and there's some new characters, like BLT makes an appearance, and and their teacher is Mr. Apple. And so you know, there's some new characters, and then I'm working on just the beginning parts of another book called Pizza and Taco Rock Out. And so when they're doing some band auditions, there's a lot of new characters who come in, including Veggie Burger, and you know, and so
Let me guess, Veggie Burger's got to be like an indie rocker or something like that.
I was kind of going for more of a folk singer, but
oh no, that's totally perfect. That's perfect. I love it.
With the Donovan guitar with the heart cut out.
I love it. Yes, that's great.
I can't wait to meet these characters, because they all have, you know, these personalities, and you know, in the books, and just kind of seeing how these different like foods and what their personality is like, and it's great. So I have to ask, did Pizza and Taco, did it start with the story or with the illustrations? Like, where did you start?
Wow. You know, this one just started. I mean, I just started drawing these characters and just mapping them out in my sketchbook and just drawing this story. And it, you know, and that's not how I normally do things. You know, like there's several, like in the past books that I've had, you know, there's some that definitely started with the story. And then there's other books where I've, you know, like drawn like a little toad for Toad on the Road. And then just created a story around that drawing. And this one, I think I was just like thinking of 2 simple characters and simple drawings. And that was another thing that informed me, was also, you know, like we do comic workshops with kids, and, you know, kids were drawing Narwhal and Jelly, the books, Narwhal and the characters from Narwhal and Jelly, and they were also drawing Dogman. And I was like, wow, it's really cool to see these kids drawing these characters, you know, like, you know, or characters similar to those characters, based on what they've seen. And so like I wanted to draw something that was really simple to draw. So, you know, you've got like a triangle and a half circle, and that's as, you know, as simple as it could be. So but all, you know, when I do drawings with kids in you know, like everyone, like kindergartners, everyone can draw Pizza and Taco pretty easily. And so like that also informed my creating it. So yeah, I think I just started, I came up with those simple characters, and actually my sketches for them are here. I think I have some here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. This is, I don't know if you can see this, but this is what it looks like. So it's just like triangles and half circles when I start doing my sketching out. So it's just really simple. And then eventually I put, you know, it looks like something more like that. And that's actually kind of what I give my editor. And believe it or not, she says it's okay. and then she trusts me to make it look better. So, which is good.
I love it. So it's kind of storyboarded out, right? Yeah, and it's really simple. But yeah, and I'm always like, I like looking back at it. I'm like, when I'm doing it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. She'll totally understand what's going on, and luckily she does. So which is really fantastic. But yeah, so yeah.
So I don't want to take away from you, but I want to brag for a moment, because I watched a video that you did for your promo for the book that you did last year, and you showed like drawing of Pizza and Taco. I'm like, well, let me try it. Let me see how I do. So they're really small. So So these are my drawings, and I'm very proud of them.
Nice,
Taco's way
awesome.
better than Taco's way better
That
than
is so cool.
I felt good about it. So I was like, hey, I can draw these now. So being an illustrator as well, how do you think the illustrations like influence or affect the story that you tell?
Yeah, I think, well, I think especially with like picture books and graphic novels, you have that visual literacy that's really important, and so you're telling half the story with the pictures, if not more, than half the story. It's like the pictures are worth 1,000 words type thing. So I think it's definitely, like, I think about like there's so much you don't have to do in graphic novels and picture books. Like, I don't have to say a character's upset, or angry about something, or excited. I just show them being excited, or like happy or angry. Like I don't have to talk about a lot of like different things about their feelings, about their emotions and what they're feeling. And you can do things too where you can be like, just for this facial expression, a character could be saying something, but it could be completely sarcastic, and you can see that like the character is being sarcastic, that they don't really like that they don't really believe what they're saying, and that's something that's harder to do when you're writing it, versus like having a drawing of someone being like like looking snarky, so I think there's a lot of like a lot of fun things you can do with that, and a lot of fun things you can do with humor. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So David, you mentioned a lot of like the stories and like the legends that that your grandmother would talk to you about, and you say that you've studied a lot of them. So how do these legends influence like the storylines of your books?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great question. So I mean, some of my other books have been retellings of folktales, but also connecting those folktales to stories in Mexico, and then those like colonial New Spain kinds of stories, folktales, fairy tales, to pre-Columbian Mesoamerican mythology and sacred stories, right? So I've done a lot of work in that space. And when HarperCollins, and let me explain something about 13th Street. It's different from other things I've written. It's what's called an IP, and that means that it's the intellectual property of the publisher, rather than something that I like independently came up with. And when they hired me to write it, the basic idea was the idea that there are three cousins that get pulled into an alternate world, and it's a street where there are monsters, and that was like essentially it. And the rest is, we trust you, we're hiring you, you're an award-winning author, do what needs to be done. And so one of the things that I immediately started thinking about was the monsters from my own childhood, and how those monsters, not from my childhood as in like when I was a kid, I fought monsters. I wish I could tell you that these were autobiographical. Sorry, those of you who are watching. Not. Unless it's autobiographical of my dreams, but definitely from the stories that I was told as a kid, and the stories that those are rooted in, that go all the way back to the Aztecs and the Maya and other people. So when I was imagining this alternate world, which, I mean, it basically looks like a street from the city, Gulf City in the book, which is like a blend of Corpus and Houston, but all broken down with shuttered windows and houses falling apart and buildings, like covered with vines and cars rusted. A little bit like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. I don't know if you've seen that series on Netflix, but like, you can imagine that, but like for little kids, so it's not quite as scary. And since the idea was to populate the street with monsters, and Harper had the idea of the bad breath bats, I started thinking about creatures that I could pull in from these stories to use as the main like antagonists of the book, or the creatures that have to defeat each one. And so as the series progresses, like a careful reader, because there's like a bigger story than the adventure that happens in each book, that's revealed slowly over the course of the 6 books until you get to the very end, and you're like, ah. And so like a really observant, careful reader will see where these things come from. So the bats, for example, in the first book are what are called in the Mayan language, Yucateco, they're called kamatsopsob. These are massive bats that live in the underworld, in the Maya underworld, Xibalba, and they're featured in like in the Popol Vuh, and they can pull people's heads off. Now, in a children's book for kids ages 5 to 9, you're not going to pull people's heads off, so they've got stinky breath that's going to paralyze you, right? And so that was the idea. Like, how can I take these creatures, these monsters, and bring them in, give them some like new freaky characteristics that the kids are able to defeat. And so yeah, it was definitely informed by all of those stories I heard as a kid and what they're rooted in terms of like indigenous stories from Mexico.
So you have a lot of those, everything we just talked about, or you just talked about, but I have to ask, are you like a gamer? Because you mentioned the idea of like video games within the story. So like, how did that come in? Or
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not a gamer anymore. I mean, when I was a kid, I was on the ground floor of video games. So like when they first came out, Pac-Man and Galaga and all that stuff, I would play in arcades or whatever. And as an adult, because of like all the different demands on my time, and because I know that I would spend all my time playing video games instead of writing, I've stayed away from it. My kids, however, are major gamers and into Dungeons and Dragons and all that. And so I knew that my readers, kids ages 5 to 9, especially boys in that age group, they're going to be interested in video games. And it made sense for me to use video game logic and to make of the three characters, Dante, like the one who's an expert in video games, because otherwise he's a little useless, because he's a handsome little cute little kid, but he doesn't have a whole lot of other skills, but he plays video games really, really well. And so he becomes like the expert who like understands why they're returning to the same place they left the previous book, and like all of it works according to video game logic. And that helped me to figure out what 13th Street is, how it came to exist, and that becomes like the larger arc of like figuring out what is this place, why is it like, why does it follow video game logic? That seems like a very unlikely thing for a monster-filled place to follow video game logic. And when the reveal comes, to me it feels really satisfying, and I think kids will immediately connect with it as well. I don't want to spoil it, but there is a reason that video game logic is used in the books.
Great, thank you. So, Stephen, what do you hope that your younger readers, or maybe even your older readers, get out of your books when they finish reading them?
First of all, I just want to say I read the first one of your book here, of the 13th Street, and I really love the idea of telling the story in kind of that that it takes place kind of in a real video game, like even with the super soakers and things like that, and just having, there's a lot of really great, I just thought, wow, that's really a great thing, because when I'm doing school visits, when we were kids, because I'm 50, and so like when we were kids, like video games really didn't tell stories so much, and nowadays they tell really rich stories, and like so, I'm always bringing that up with kids, like about, because I'm more focused on stories than I am focused on, necessarily writing or art or anything, just telling a story and being able to tell a story, and and that video games are definitely like a way of telling a story now, and I think that's really cool. Anyways, I'm sorry. And so, sorry, I just wanted to say, because that was a really cool aspect of your book. Yeah. Anyways, what was the question? I'm sorry.
That's okay. What do you hope your younger readers, or maybe even your older readers, get out of your book when they finish reading them?
With these books, I really hope kids have fun with these stories, and just have fun, and hopefully they take away some things. There's definitely some learning things in there where you might have to plan some of the ideas, and also there's especially by the second one I start incorporating, and the third one I start incorporating, where have to really solve their problems and figure it out. And they write down ideas to try and solve their problems and how to maybe the next time not fail. And I think that's good. And I think it's also good to know that, everybody fails. And so you just got to figure out what went wrong, and so, yeah, I think that would be probably a good takeaway. Other than that, I write these for fun. So I just sit in my room and I'm, drawing and writing and laughing at myself. And so, yeah. So, so hopefully kids get that out of it too. A lot of humor and entertainment, hopefully.
I mean, there's definitely
Hey, Stephen. Yeah, Stephen, can I ask a question? So how do you get that effect, like pizza, like the texture on pizza? Is that like are you using like some kind of like photo for that? It just looks really, I always freak out when I see it. It looks so cool.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I wanted to do differently in this book. I wanted to make it look different than other books similar to it. And so I did actually photograph some pizzas. I incorporated other photographs. I found just to get that real look to it in the background. But yeah, and this one's been kind of an interesting thing because I kind of approached it more as kind of digital collage. It's all I draw this one mostly on my computer and the characters and then cut out pieces of different things. There's different kinds of textured papers that I use to make the grass. There's different, and even the sidewalks and different things like that I've scanned in, or, like that type of thing. So yeah, I tried to kind of make more of like a digital collage effect.
I love that so much. When you're reading it, it kind of feels like certain children's books that do that same technique, that use collage, bring all those elements together. I think of, well, there are tons of children's books, but like Yuya Morales's Dreamers is one that just pops in my mind as a recent one that uses interesting collages. So wow, yeah, it's a great effect and something, at least, I haven't read all the graphic novels in the world, and I don't read a lot of younger ones, but it's something I hadn't really seen very much until I saw your books. I was like, wow, I love the way this looks. So kudos for that. It was a really, really brilliant move, I think.
Thank you. That's very kind. No, yeah, I think I was really influenced by Gumball, the television, the cartoon, and I just really loved how they just put everything in, into this thing, but it works. And I was hoping to do that. And actually, one of the first drafts that I did, I went way over the top with it, and my editor and art director were like, pull it back. So that was good too. But yeah.
Just a reminder, if you have any questions, if you please put them in the Q&A section. So hopefully we can get to those in a bit. So just a reminder about that. So David, I know you mentioned about your books, trying to show readers not only themselves, but show readers who aren't familiar with Mexican culture and things like that, to expose them to it. Is there something do you have anything else that you want your readers to get out of reading your books, especially the 13th Street series?
One of the things that I was really happy that HarperCollins allowed me to do was to include Spanish in the book. So, because these chapter books are for kids who are graduating out of picture books, out of children's books, into reading longer books that have chapters in them. That's why they're called chapter books, with fewer illustrations. Although, there are literally illustrations on nearly every page of this book, which is just so cool. I love the illustrations by Shane Klessler. And Shane Klessler, he has been a great partner to work with and really, really understands the world that I'm trying to transmit. But that use of Spanish, because they're kids who are just really beginning to read on their own, I was a little concerned that they wouldn't let me do it, but they did. They went with it without any problem. I'm not overwhelming the book with Spanish, but they're Mexican American kids in South Texas. Occasionally, they're going to throw in a Spanish word, right? And I didn't overdo it with definition at the bottom of the page or whatever. No, I just, in context, it's clear what they're trying to say. And just allowing them to talk also like Texans. They say y'all to each other all the time. There's none of this plural you. It doesn't exist. It's y'all. And so what I'm hoping that people who read it get out of it is also a feel for how language can be used in like rich and geographically specific ways. I think that I'm a big proponent of how like the specific elements in a story help make it universal. So like you're reading a story about these 3 kids in the specific fictional town of Nopalitos, which is basically like Alice. And with their specific Mexican American lives and so forth, but the things that they go through together will be appreciated by kids from any culture because they have like these universal experiences and lessons they learn, and that's what I hope readers get out of it, is just an appreciation not only for how cool Mexican American culture is and how awesome our language is and how brilliant we are for speaking 2 languages and popping back and forth between them, but also that that the specifics of our culture will resonate with them as human, as meaningful to them as well, even though they're not Mexican American, because they're human stories. And I think this is a time in this country and in the world when we really need to see one another as human, because there's a lot of rhetoric that kind of tries to get us to think of ourselves as other than other people. And rather than being afraid or intimidated or hating the cultural specifics of other people, we have to be able to embrace those cultural specifics and see beyond them that the human being that lies at the heart of all of those traditions. So that may be a really lofty goal. Whoa, I want people to have harmony and universal peace or whatever. I know I'm not running from Miss America or anything like that, but it is something that I'd like to foster understanding among different cultural groups.
I think it's really important, and they say people who read more, they tend to be more empathetic, and so I think it's just, that's something that we definitely want people to have.
I agree.
Stephen, what advice do you have for aspiring writers or illustrators?
Wow, that's a good question. I think my advice is basically to look at what you like, not what you don't like. And write from the heart, write what you like, and keep working at it. And that's the most important thing, is just to keep working at it. And even with anything, it takes practice over and over and over to keep working on something. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. And I think that's kind of really important too. I think really, like, I see a lot of people who like entered like children's books world, and they're like, oh, I can write a book better than that. And I don't think that's the way to approach it, because like as a teacher, I read so many books that were so just amazing books by so many different authors. And I always wanted to write a book as good as one of those, not better than somebody else's that I didn't like. It's like, I don't want to write a book better than a book I don't like. I want to write a book as good as a book that I really love. And I think that's something to aim for. Yeah. I guess that's good advice.
That's pretty amazing. I like the way that you put that.
Yeah. David, same question. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, my advice is similar to Stephen's in that you should write about what you like and what you know. There's an audience for it, no matter how unusual you think it is, or how few people like you or with the kind of story or interest that you have that you've seen published. You may be the first one. There are people that want to hear the story that you want to tell. And so you need to find the best way to get it to them. So that means reading lots and lots and lots of other books that are similar that are like maybe for the similar age group, or before we started transmitting, we were talking about the books that we've been reading, the 3 of us, and a lot of times we as writers or illustrators will read books in the genre we're trying to work in. So like just read really widely in the genre that you want to write, and then find the best way using the tools of that genre or of that medium to tell the story that you want to tell that's important to you. Like, it's when a story doesn't move you or make you laugh or make you cry, it's going to be really hard for anybody else to feel those emotions. It's got to come from a really personal place, I think. Sometimes that personal place may be culturally or geographically rooted. A lot of my stories are. It doesn't have to be, because we all, in addition to belonging to like the culture or ethnicity or whatever we belong to, we also belong to interest groups. Some of it, or we might be sci-fi fans, or maybe it might come from some understanding of your gender that has opened your eyes to stories that you can tell. Like, whatever it is, pursue that story that needs to be told, that you have a burning to tell, because you're going to be able to tell it really, really well. And I mean, there's frankly no better advice. And but the thing of practicing. I know a lot of young writers who wish they could be discovered at age 13 or whatever, and get their book published. Most of us, however, need to do a lot of writing. 10,000 words, 10,000 hours, 100,000 words, whatever it is. There's usually, you've got to process through your amateur years and get to be a pro before you're going to be able to break into the market. But you will get there if you practice hard enough.
Awesome. Thank you. Stephen, so in Pizza and Taco, when they're trying to show that they're the best, they share with each other about what's the best thing about the other. So what would somebody say that is something that you are the best at? Really good at.
Oh wow. I don't know. I think a lot of people think I'm good at art, and I was always told that growing up, throughout my life, and I always was into making art. But one of the things is, I think I always knew that other people were just as good, if not better than I was at art, but the thing is, I just keep doing it because I love to do it. So I don't know, I don't try not to have too much of an ego about stuff. I think I did that in my 20s, but I'm 50 now, and I don't, I'm a little more humble. So yeah.
David, what would somebody say that you're the best at or really good
at? Oh my God. Somebody might say that I'm really, really good at languages. I've studied 13 languages. I grew up bilingual. I know an indigenous language novel that I've translated from a lot. And so, I mean, if there's one thing that people would say that I'm good at, it's that, languages. I pick them up fast. I'm able to translate from them and write about them and write in them. So that facility with languages has led to just a deeper understanding of how to communicate ideas in writing in the best way for a particular audience. So it looks like we have a question. No, don't we?
We do have a question, yes. So Erica asks, what would you tell your young readers about perseverance? What setbacks have you had in your journey, and how have they shaped the authors and illustrators you are today? So David, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, setbacks, there have been plenty. I mean, it's hard to break into publishing, just to be honest with you. And there are many pathways in. The traditional one is to get an agent, to write the book, get an agent who loves the book, and then the agent helps you polish it, and then they help you sell it. But it's not always easy to get an agent. And, when I was younger, it was harder. And the stories that I wanted to tell were stories that were often not seen as marketable. In other words, like if you were to, I was writing stories about Mexican American characters living in Mexican American communities and grappling with Mexican American concerns, and speaking, Spanglish to each other and things like that. And there were a lot of agents that would push back against that and say, I don't know how to I don't know who to sell this to. I don't know how to market it. And there was this perception that Mexican Americans don't buy books and Latinx people don't read and things like that. And it was a tough time. I mean, the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, it was, I had no luck. I had books rejected by dozens of agents, and I had to come through like an indie route and get my first books published through like small indie publishers, and then university presses, and then I started winning some awards. I won an award from the American Library Association, and then agents were like, and then like also like there was a transformation going on in publishing and awareness that people from communities of color were underrepresented, like horribly underrepresented. We make up, nearly half of the population of this country now, and yet there's like fewer than 10% of the books published every year from writers from our communities. So those barriers, eventually, my perseverance paid off, and there was recognition of my work, and that opened more doors, and then that opened more doors, and so on. And once you build up momentum, then it keeps going by itself. But also the industry has been shifting and changing, and that has allowed more people whose voices are not traditionally published to be published.
Thank you. Stephen, what advice would you give, or what would you tell young readers?
Well, like I said before, if you like doing it, just keep doing it, whatever it is, and that's perseverance is like if you like sports, if you like science, if you like anything, just like keep doing what you like doing, and you'll get better at it and better at it. When I was a kid, I was with a group I had like 5 friends who all drew comics, and I kept drawing. Some of them stopped, some of them went on to be fine artists that are amazing at doing fine art, and some of them went on to work at Microsoft, but not doing art, and they're doing great stuff, but they stopped doing it, but like out of that 5, I might have been like out of that 5, I might have been like the 4th best, like out of the group, and I knew that, but like I just love to do it. And so just, if you like to do it, just keep doing it. If you like telling stories, keep telling stories, keep writing stories. If you like to draw, keep drawing. If you like anything, just keep doing it. I think that's the most important thing. It's that thing that you said, like the 100,000 words or whatever it has to be. And yeah, just like keep doing it.
Thank you. That's some great advice. And I think, young readers and those people who want to, also break into writing, that's all great stuff too, for them to hear. So thank you for that. So I just want to give a reminder that if you would like to purchase books from David and Stephen, please get it from the link that's on the site from Nora Bookshop. That would be great to support not only independent bookstores, but also our writers. And I want to give a huge thank you to David and Stephen for joining us today. I really appreciate it. This was great. It was great talking to you guys. Loved it. And thank you to all of you for stopping by. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day and any other sessions that you may be going to today. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.